This is the third in a 4-semester cycle that is devoted to the great conversation about how should we live. And, we are doing the early modern period this time, so it's very exciting readings. We start with Luther, we go through Erasmus, Bacon, Shakespeare, Spinoza, and then all the way to Rousseau, Kant, Byron. Lord Byron is the one we're going to end on. So it's titled Reformation and Enlightenment. We're covering a lot of ground here. These are the 3 centuries from 1500 basically to 1800 where the world that we live in takes shape. So we did the classical age the first semester, the medieval the last semester. Here we're talking about the origins of the modern nation state, the world that we really still inhabit. And mentioning the question of policing, for instance, not to be too controversial, but if we need to think about these matters, which we do, we can start with something like that. Police comes from polis, and the polis that policing is part of is the nation state. It's not a given, it's something that's developed over time. And so doing this program would help, I think, give us some insight into the questions we need to actually be grappling with right now in our own society. The questions of authority. What is it that we take as authorities in our lives? Is what would make our life choices make sense? Where do we go to get approval? And as a people, where do we seek to get the stamp of approval for the kinds of reasons that we've got for making the choices we make? In these centuries that we're going to go over this semester, we have before us the authority of clerics, the authority of the Bible, the authority of conscience, the authority of humane letters, the authority of secular government, the authority of science, reason, and then finally the authority of passion. And so we in our own lives tend to mix these together, and it's a good idea to dig deeper and to find out maybe where some of these claims to authority come from. So we are talking about the transition to global capital and the modern nation state. This period is when the nations of Western Europe start to take on a disproportionate influence in world history. We know this because of the Protestant Reformation, then the Age of Discovery, the wars of religion, the scientific revolution, the Enlightenment, and finally Romanticism as a kind of rejection of Enlightenment, but still an extension of Enlightenment. We'll have a lot of discussion about how Romanticism fits in with Enlightenment. I like to focus on political questions when I'm thinking about the ethics question of how should we live. I know Danilo shares this passion. A lot of us do. This question of where sovereignty comes from. Again, that's related to the question of authority. We live in a political world in which the nation state has consolidated all sovereignty in itself. Now, I believe that the great political philosopher Pierre Manon is right that the nation state is kind of indispensable. I'm a fan, but it's the great artifice of modernity, but it's also very dangerous because that much power we've never seen concentrated in a political body before. It's unprecedented. And we have to deal with, so policing is part of that, right? How do you deal with that much power? The American solution had to do with checks and balances following Montesquieu and so on. And I think that's still kind of the way forward. But there are other checks, right? Natural law, human rights. Those are supposed to be the ultimate check, at least on the secular theory. That's how you check government power. Those of us who are religious, you have religious claims that are supposed to check any political claim. And these are questions that we will deal with. We're going to deal with these questions without, hopefully without a spirit of partisanship. Though I'm a committed religious believer, I am very serious in wanting to have all viewpoints represented vigorously, because it's very boring to hear only your own ideas reflected back to you. And we know that so much of what's wrong with the republic we've got right now is that people have hived off into echo chambers. What we've got here in this program, and I've loved, it has been so deeply nourishing to me because you have here people from every viewpoint who do not agree on fundamental issues, and yet we talk to each other. We have this great conversation about how we should live, and it really is moving. And so I hope you're able to come as often as you can. It's not a requirement that you come every time, but it's more fun the more often you come. I mean, we will start off next week with Luther. The readings that we've tried to make the readings manageable so that you could maybe read them in a couple of hours. The books are not ready yet, but they will be ready soon. The PDF is available, though, so you will have access to the reading. We'll start off with The Freedom of a Christian by Luther, one of his first, the three reformatory tracts of 1520. Very important documents. We follow that up with Erasmus. I'm not going to go through all of them, but Erasmus is important for me because I think of Christian humanism, which is what he represents, as a kind of a path that was not traversed. And so I'll lay my cards on the table. I think a lot about, I think very well and highly of Christian humanism. So that's an option that I think we should all at least thoughtfully look at. Those two great thinkers, Luther and Erasmus, were dealing with a profound crisis in the Catholic Church, a crisis that was centuries in the making, the crisis of the 1300s when this was already something Dante was looking at the end of his life, right? When the papacy went over to Avignon, and that was devastating to the mind of Europe because it made no sense for Rome to be vacated. It's hard for us to work our way into that, but that was a devastating blow to the European imagination. And then after that schism was... after that, the papacy was restored to Rome. The church went right into the Great Papal Schism, and that was even more devastating to the European mind because now we had 2 and sometimes 3 claimants to the papal throne, and that would ramify throughout every town in Europe, where you had bishops who were claiming this is my pope, and then bishops claiming that's my pope. You didn't know who to believe, and you thought your eternal salvation depended on getting it right. It was devastating. And so part of also the move, there was there were fiscal realities of the Pope leaving the papal states where the Pope could gather taxes. So there was this tendency to make money off of spiritual things. And that's what Luther had to deal with. He said the selling of indulgences was a true abuse. And Luther, in his conscience, was starting to see that was a problem. But then he went ahead and made the total break, which Erasmus never made. So these are some of the things that are before us. With these fundamental revolutions in how we've situated ourselves in the world, we had to ask, by what principle would we order our common life? That's what we all have to do as a people. And with the path of Christian humanism not fully traversed, a new type of governmentality would instead assert itself. A secular state built on consolidated sovereignty, standing armies, imperialism, increasing taxation, and emerging technological power. And that's the world we've got. The measure of rationality in this early modern period shifts from religion to science. As the 30 Years' War kills off half of the population of the German lands, it was in barbarism we would not see again until the First World War. It was unimaginable. And so we have theorists like Hobbes thinking the first thing is to somehow keep war at bay. So he was willing to deal a lot away to get peace. But then we have all of that death, and so secular government would be claiming we can do it better. And then Newton showed that there's an order linking the motion of the stars with the motion of projectiles. And so it seemed that we had now a way to understand everything, the motion of not only physics, but the motion of society. And so we had all these new ways of doing politics that claimed to be scientific. And Hobbes was part of that, Spinoza was part of that. But we would ask, is there still a place for realities that are not scientifically measurable in this world in which science has proven itself quite effective in changing our lives? We're still living within the prestige of science because science keeps delivering. Science keeps giving us new technology, new toys, new ways of living more comfortable lives. But then, is it the case that scientific reason can say there is nothing beyond the horizon of science?